Hello, this is Ridley Scott. I'm the director of this film, G.I. Jain, that you're about to look at, and I hope you find the information that I'm about to talk through interesting. There's something to talk about almost immediately because the title sequence had originally been shot and designed around a luge sequence, which was basically showing how the central character, the Demi Moore character, was pretty physically adept kind of Navy officer. And so we opened the film on the luge, which was shot at Lake Placid, to show her as a kind of Olympic wannabe and Navy team. But it kind of set her up too much as the Superwoman, and therefore we removed it, and she comes up the way you'll see in Naval Intelligence.
Combat units. The last few years have brought
Besides, it was actually more interesting to open up directly on the issue and meet the person who seemed to be the main supporter of the whole process of women's rights, who is Anne Bancroft, who plays the chairwoman of the Senate Arms Committee, and who, of course, here is seen to be dominating a meeting in the hearing room.
Without much time left, so you'll pardon me if I jump right in here? I'm deeply concerned.
Anne Bancroft was always my first choice, you know, as a representative of strength and intelligence, and certainly a dominating character for women's rights, and was always perfect in my mind for the Senator de Haven. And we were lucky enough to get her, so it was a real pleasure working with her. There's a kind of look I wanted about the overall view of the film, which only really surfaces afterwards because people make comments about the very specific quality and look of my films. And, of course, once I embark on the process of making a movie, it kind of gets like preset, a little bit like a computer in the back of my mind. So I become it becomes subconscious. It's not a very conscious decision. Once I've set into something, I just kind of just follow through down that route, and everything kind of falls into place. So the look on this was decided to be rather somber and very austere. And I think that's the look we attained, because it went well with the subject and went well with the military context.
What it bodes for the future of women in the Navy, but for your future as well.
Senator DeHaven, do you expect to take criticism for using this controversy?
This is, again, in Washington, not a set, of course. There weren't many sets, actually, in the whole film. Most of it was almost entirely on location.
How strong do you have to be to pull a trigger?
That was quick. Yeah, she did great. Are you kidding? She's always great.
DeHaven's assistant there, you might recognize him. He's the guy who played on that quite interesting film about David Letterman, the story, and he played David Letterman, I think it was last year. And I needed a character that this guy is John Michael Higgins, who has a kind of personality of an assistant who, I believe, assistants to these people in positions of power are probably one of the few people who are able to speak to them privately, of course, and say exactly what they feel. So these people are never just secretaries, or they're more than that. And John fulfilled that role very well. He was smart and humorous.
The Navy will want approval over the women.
So I'll approve their approval?
Come on, Senator. Let's concentrate on the steak and not the peas. If women measure up to the men, they've got the job. That's what's on the table. You're not having second thoughts, are you?
Washington once again. One of our problems in the script was actually laying out the arena and, you know, of course, the reality of the political arena and all the subtexts. At the same time, we wanted to get, you know, quickly into the story with Lieutenant O'Neill and the Navy stuff, because obviously the Navy stuff in many respects was, let's say, more dynamic because it was more physical, and we've seen less of that before. So this is where we introduce O'Neill, who is a naval strategist at NIC in Washington.
Suggest new location.
This is one of the few sets that we built in the process, because obviously we couldn't shoot naval intelligence. But this is a scene which shows this character, Lieutenant O'Neill, as a good lateral and vertical thinker who will tend to put herself in the position of the protagonists to understand what their plan and procedure should be, which makes her one of the best. It's interesting because we take the subtext of this scene, i.e. that she's got particularly unusually good intuition, and we use that idea later in the last act in the film, which I'll bring up when we get to it.
These are skilled operators. They've grasped the
The computer programs in the war room were kind of partly guesswork, but also based on research of what you see there. A lot of it is logic. A lot of it is in a constant stage of developing sophistication. The more accurate they can get, the better, because it's up to these strategists who are sitting thousands of miles away to try and get absolutely what is happening. So some of it's guesswork, but a lot of it's based on what we saw in still photographs. Arthur Max was my production designer. This is the first time I worked with Arthur in the context of a feature film, but I had done several commercials with him over the years, and so I knew him well. He's a particularly talented production designer whose background is as an architect. Certainly Arthur didn't want to make this interior like a James Bond view of naval intelligence, because for the most part, when you look at the actual reference photographs of these particular places, they're usually pretty dull. And you view many points of reference and go, oh God, is that all there is? So it was a combination of, trying to make it interesting without being overtly Bondian, let's say. And I think this looks quite real.
Okay, let's see what...
Back to Anne Bancroft and her team here, who are sorting through the process of selection, shortlist of who these women could be to be put up for, prospective candidates for the Navy SEAL training program.
Cover of Newsweek. She looks like the wife of a Russian beat farmer. I like this one.
This was a kind of mansion outside of Washington, this location, which was, of course, empty, so Arthur had to go in and dress it up and make it look like, I guess, what could be offices inside of the corridors of power.
This really is top drawer. With silk stockings inside.
Interesting to note, we made this set in what was an old supermarket in, was it North or South Carolina? I can't remember now. But it was an old supermarket which also housed the art department because it was such a large shed. And it gave us enough studio space so we could have the full art department on the one hand, and in the other half we could build whatever we needed to do. This was the biggest set we had to build.
Belay my last.
Copy that. Maintain perimeter and advise further hostile
It was good head work, Lieutenant.
Well, thank you, sir.
This, in fact, is the lobby of a studio that we were in Washington. We borrowed. It was a TV studio. So this is actually the lobby because we were doing O'Neill's house. We'd built her bathroom inside. So the door they came through there is to the actual studio. And where we shot this is the actual lobby of the actual studio. So as you can see, even on fairly high-priced movies, you're still going to make do and mend and be very practical about where you have to fit things in. Nothing ever really falls into place. But that's probably part of the excitement of doing the process of what I do for a living. So this is DeHaven's private rooms, which I think for Washington and any senator looking at this would be amused and say, well, that looks pretty grand. And we didn't give her a lot of space because their rooms very often are half that size. And the ones I actually saw looked a little more like university professor's studies. But I wanted to make the Anne Bancroft character like Ann Richards of Texas. In fact, that's how it was written, with that in mind. But then, of course, when you get Anne involved, we then discussed it and thought, well, it was a good boilerplate to begin. But, clearly she wanted to do her own character.
Begging your pardon, Senator,
But we still went in the direction of this rather grand dame, which, of course, Anne is. She might not like that, actually, calling her a grand dame, but she is. She's great, and she's very easy to work with, is a real, I hate to use the word team player, because it sounds like it's easy, because it's not. An actor's job is not easy. It's quite difficult, otherwise we'd all be doing it.
Yes, ma'am.
But I find there are actors who are prepared to contribute or, regard it as a partnership. And that's the way I like to work. I like to work with actors in the sense that I don't believe in this process of Svengali, where I mold them, like clay, which I think is frequently bullshit. I think my job is to actually cast the best person I can get for the role. And once I've done that, if I've been successful at that, then really my job becomes a little easier in that respect, in terms of the performances, because I can then become a barometer of what they do and what their talent brings to the part. And therefore I try and regard the whole creative relationship as a partnership. They feel more comfortable that way. And therefore, the whole point from a director's point of view is to create a kind of comfort zone for my performers. I don't believe in bullying my performers. Some directors work in the way that they bully and make them insecure because they believe that that will give them a better performance. I don't believe that. I believe in creating the partnership, creating really like a safety net where they feel they can do or try anything, and it won't matter. We will be right or we'll be wrong. And if we feel that we're on the edge of being wrong, then we will cover ourselves and, try other things. So it's very much like an open relationship. I think it means they enjoy it as well as I do. Jason Bagey, I'd worked with before, who was playing the boyfriend. I'd cast Jason in Thelma and Louise. He played the kind of, if you like, fascistic cop who got locked in the trunk by Thelma. Apart from the fact he's a good actor, apart from the fact he's got a good sense of humor, when he first came in that casting session on Thelma and Louise, he was the only actor who came up with the idea, and he didn't talk about it, he just burst into tears. That just gave him the edge for me. I thought it was a great way to go, and that's what we did in the movie. That's what I'm talking about earlier when I talk about partnership. I'll certainly recognize if somebody comes up with a good idea or something that I hadn't thought of, and I'll be very willing to adopt and go along that process. And Jason's job of all the characters in the movie was the least specific because, ironically, he's playing the love interest in a sense. He was a very curious character to see and to watch. And on a role that could have easily just passed by with a good job, I think Jason brought something really to it. Has a very interesting screen presence. This is a real Navy base at Jacksonville, Florida. We were not allowed to use anything that was an operational base because the DOD did not approve of this script, and therefore I got no help whatsoever from the Defense Department. I think that's pretty understandable why. There are too many subtexts and too many discussions in this to make it, acceptable as far as they're concerned or acceptable as far as their policy is concerned. So everything we had to do here, including putting those two cannons in there, including putting in the chains and two mines. You see a mine on the left, that's a mine. These two things are mines. So I made an entrance of the mines with the chains and the stakes because I'd seen that done at an operational base in North Carolina. I really liked it. So here we are now in a non-operational base, which is Camp Blanding, which had closed down about 4 or 5 years ago. base officer here is played by Scott Wilson, who was probably really, brought into the world and really noticed, first of all, as playing one of the characters in the Truman Capote In Cold Blood. He was one of the killers, ironically, and here he is playing a kind of Southern gentleman commanding officer. And when I was researching and obviously traveling around many bases before the Navy said yes or no to the process, so I'd met a lot of officers and a lot of rankers and a lot of intermediary officers, and I'd certainly come across a lot of commanding officers, and what you forget is that a career officer, a lifer, he's a lifer. He is dedicated to the process and to the flag. And frequently, they are religious. Very strong views on codes and standards, which in a way makes them kind of curious people. And this is the way we were going with Scott. In this scene, and particularly from this point in the film, we now have a good look at the Navy base, and it's a specialist group. They are a covert group, and really, to use the word Spartan is a very good description. And therefore, I wanted the way it was shot, the color, the somber quality was very important to me. So I'd elected to use a cameraman I'd worked with once before who DP'd White Squall for me, which was the year before, who I have a long history with. Huey Johnson is a director, in fact, of commercials and rock videos, and has been doing that for almost 12 years, but he's now looking towards doing movie. And he'd asked me, he said, I'd like to come back and just stand alongside in the closest possible way to watch the process on a film. And the closest way would be a cameraman in my case. And so this was the second film with me because he was starting to enjoy it, I think, going back to being a cameraman on film. I think the one thing about the role of a director that a lot of people don't realize is that you are expected to be the expert on everything. You're expected to be the expert on wristwatches, shoes, contact lenses, costume, lighting, casting, you name it. Everybody comes and asks you because you're the conduit through which everything goes. And unless you enjoy that, don't do the job, because it can either stress the hell out of you and drive you crazy, or you eventually learn to take it in your stride and just deal with it.
Average woman.
So here we're meeting in the mess hall the group of guys who will probably, for the most part, run through the movie with Demi. The casting process for these guys is always difficult because I'm trying to find new people. This is my opportunity as a director to introduce new faces to the process, because each one of these guys hasn't got a lot to do, but accumulatively they're there throughout the movie. So, and they are very important to the film, of course, as a group. And therefore, it's a great opportunity for them. And so, of course, I'm looking for a potential star in each one of them.
Yeah, elite combat unit. Genius idea was that. That's bullshit. I mean, they can't do what we can do. How does it happen?
All I'm saying is one night, Lord. Just give me one night and I'll set her straight.
Slob niggas feeling good like a hard man should.
Said stow it. Gentlemen, you heard the policy.
Here we are on the parade ground, which is an existing place, but the huts were very boring, so we put in all those steel verandas and put in on the ground sand, white sand, to make us nearer to the sea than we actually were. In fact, Arthur added quite a lot, changed the color of the whole thing. The huts were painted black. The sand at first was almost a shade too white, so I was concerned at first it looked like snow, and then I thought, well, what the hell? It's kind of gives me a nice graphic quality. The bell is an addition. You'll see as you watch the movie the importance of that bell. The courses vary between, let's say, 40 and 50 personnel the fallout rate is tremendously high. If the fallout rate was total, then they would have no candidates at the end of it. So they are looking for the best. They have no preconceived targets on what they think they'll come out with at the end of it.
Many of you will not successfully negotiate.
It's his job. This is Viggo Mortensen, as the Master Chief, to try and see that nobody comes out at the end of it. Because if anybody does, then they're 100% distilled alcohol, and that's what he's looking for.
It is to be said about the special nature of the CRT training program. I now turn you over to my Command Master Chief, John James Gale.
The idea of casting a Master Chief could have been going down the usual route of the macho, loud, bully, the traditional way that it seems to be done. And I met a few Master Chiefs after this point, and I ironically found them the antithesis of that. I found them to be quiet, introspective, reserved, but to use the word dangerous is kind of silly, but there was something about them which was like a steel hawser. That's what I was kind of going for here, and Viggo had a very interesting screen presence, which I noticed first of all in Sean Penn's film Indian Runner. So Viggo became my target, really, and it really became my first choice because I thought of all the people who can do this, of which I won't mention those names. I'd either seen them do it before, which I didn't want. I wanted a first on this one, certainly for Viggo, so this is for him a really big, big change, a big departure. It was his idea when he does a small fragment of poetry. We had something else written, and I felt it a little bit bullshitty. And I said to him, what would be interesting was if we can find a poem, but it's got to be brief. You cannot have 19 stanzas. We need something which is like almost so short it's almost a slogan. And what I then discovered was that Viggo Mortensen's a poet, published and unrecorded on CDs. He came up with several, and we chose that particular piece. In the background there you see a carrier. That's a big carrier. That's at the port, main naval base of Jacksonville. It so happened that the beach I wanted, let me remind you, we were not being held by the DOD at all, but I decided to build my camp here, which is my beach training camp, open camp, right opposite the naval base. So in fact, I would actually benefit by what I saw in the background, which on this particular morning was a super carrier, and whenever I could, I used the main naval base as a background for what was going on. So I got a little bit of my cake and eat it anyway. The most frustrating thing about working with water, which I'm now becoming an expert, is that it moves all the time. And even if you're working on a beach, on terra firma, the goddamn tide keeps going in and out. So every time you put a camera down and you delay for 20 minutes, everything's changed. So it's a very frustrating process. You have to move quickly, otherwise it will eat you up, or it will eat your time up. The invention of a course which would be credible, but at the same time would be more filmic than just push-ups, just press-ups, just trainees climbing on those climbing frames. Whilst doing that is very tough and very difficult, it's not very filmic. It's kind of boring, and we've seen it all before. So I'd seen these fenders, which in fact are huge rubber fenders, which weigh about 3,000 pounds, which are buffers for carriers, okay? I started to invent a different kind of strategy for the training program, but I always worked in conjunction with my advisors. That's Harry Humphreys, who would say, that's too far, or I'd buy that. In fact, that's a good idea. And, when they devise these training programs, they're changing them all the time. Very often it's down to the imagination of the commanding personnel who are devising the course or bringing the course up to date. And these courses, believe me, just doing this, when you're covered in sand, you've got salt water, everything's chafing, and it's quite cold and is difficult. But the thing that I found was most perverse, and I thought was really great, was not allowing them to sleep more than an hour and 15 minutes in 3 days. And then at the end of it, after all that physical process, expecting them then to think, and therefore give them a mental exercise as well. And you'll see that will come up. So that's getting and taking these characters as really near to the process of reality as possible. Because real war, real experience in the front, where you're getting your feet wet on enemy lines, is going to be much worse than anything that these people serve up for them. Now, a lot of these other characters, other than my 8, who are cast in New York and Los Angeles, for the most part, all the other characters are partly cast locally. Some who wanted to do it, who'd been part of the fallout rate of casting in New York and LA, were told, well, if you want to do it, if you're that desperate to do it, you know, find your way down to Florida and we'll find a way of putting you up. And you'd be amazed the number of people would want to do that. Anything to get into the process, which I think is admirable. But for the most part, a lot of this is local. Ex-SEALs, ex-Marines, they're all pretty fit anyway, because whilst this is filming, it's still murderous. The day that the guys were going to have their hair cut, Demi organized a shave your dome party, so they all, had this booze up, I think beer and pizza, and a lot of electric razors, and actually all shaved each other's heads. Demi couldn't, of course. She had to save hers until the time. Just having to eat. I didn't really want to allow it to be normal. I wanted it to be maximum pressure. If you're going to eat, you got to fight for it. Because if you're in northern Iraq and you've been there for 5 days and you've run out of your rations, you're going to have to eat snakes. And nothing should be comfortable in this process. And you're given 3.5 minutes to engulf something and then get it back out there. These guys, these bullies, are in fact these people's best friend, because they're putting them through a process that is, as I've said before, will be much less tougher than anything will happen to them later. The haircutting process really was almost a nuisance, because, it's amazing how fast your hair grows, and to maintain that real buzz cut had to be adjusted almost every other day. It almost took as much effort as long hair, but it had to be really shorn and close to the scalp. So here they haven't finished their day yet. The Master Sergeant, of course, is, living and behaving in a normal fashion. He's having his evening meal. They've now been in the water, probably having done a 4-mile swim, and they think it's the end of their day. All these characters, when they were brought down to Florida in preparation for the film, were brought in 2 weeks early, and I insisted that they do a 2-week process of living on the camp under the guidance of Harry Humphreys and his assistants. Harry Humphreys was a SEAL officer for some time in his career, in his life. They were taken through the SEAL training process for 2 weeks before we even began principal photography. That was kind of dovetailed into rehearsal. So Demi was expected to do that as well. Vigo was there all the time, present, watching, and gradually got involved. So these guys, by the time we started filming, had already had 2 weeks sharpening up. And of course, before I cast them, one of the things I knew would be more than strenuous, that part of the qualification, apart from being a good actor, was I had to make damn sure that each of these guys were as fit as they said they were, or as fit as they thought they were. I like the idea of eating what you didn't eat at lunchtime out of a black plastic bag in a dustbin, or in a garbage bin, as you say. Garbage bin would be clean, of course.
I told you, get your chow, report to Alpha Barracks.
If you feel...
Here again, they still think it's the end of their day, and they're maybe minutes from being able to go and get a hot shower and go to bed. That's not the case.
And a good night's sleep. I know you're saying...
One thing I tried to do, which was a thing that was a last-minute thought, was these boats are heavy anyway, without water in. But what I did was I put water in them to make them heavier. But the water was sloshing around all over the place. And I don't know whether it comes across that, in fact, they have water in them or not. But the boats on their own must weigh, I don't know, 400 pounds. Even though they're rubber, they're very solid, tough. Take anything.
Right.
Demi and I had been swapping notes for a couple of years in terms of saying, you know, what are you doing next, what I'm doing next. And so we'd swapped a couple of ideas and scripts. And then this one came from her to me, and I thought this was an excellent arena for her. And, you know, a really nice idea, and particularly good for her. So I thought this was the one. I hadn't done the military side before, and that kind of fascinated me. So I got into it that way, because Demi offered it to me.
Stand! Don't do it, Stand!
So this is where what they're looking for here. So they're beginning the dropout rate, and we now see the use of the bell.
There goes Stam.
Dilettante. Slow day at the office.
Dropped on request.
Now, without sleep, they're now being asked to write an essay and be literate. They've probably now been going 19 hours. And they're not going to be allowed to sleep either. But it's always this belief that this must be the last evolution. I will sleep after this. But it's not going to be the case.
When I come back, I'll be counting open eyes.
A lot of it, devising it, became not really so much as being perverse or thinking of perverse reasons about what to do to people, but more really consolidating logic and the requirements of these people in how they have to perform and under what conditions they have to perform in later. These characters are not just physical gorillas. These are people who are technically the best in their own particular field, whether it's a radio officer, medical, strategist. And also they've all got to be able to cross-collateralize, because if one went down in a group of 7, they've all got to have enough knowledge about medicine or field medicine to be able to cover. So if the medic expert went down, the other 6 have got to have that knowledge. So they're pretty bright characters, as well as being physically very, very tough. Make no mistake about that. And ironically, the idea now of, if you ask yourself the question of, do I think that the military are necessary? If you come up with the answer of yes, I believe they're probably necessary, then the idea of covert groups is not only practical, it's also becoming like the spearhead of more state-of-the-art warfare in terms of avoiding warfare. So in other words, these groups are sent in sometimes months before a confrontation, and the idea being that they will pinpoint absolutely all the coordinates on strategic positions, so when and if the confrontation happens, they can pinpoint what they need to pinpoint to the meter. That way, it probably saves lives, which I think is really what the final focus on military is all about.
The next evolution. Are you ready, Lieutenant?
So they thought they were going to sleep. They're not. They're going to now be taken because, as one of the assistants says to Vigo, we got perfect conditions for the next evolution because it's raining. This was really raining here, and we really got lightning and everything because we were on the edge of a hurricane season. And we thought about stopping for the evening, but then I thought, it's crazy, we may as well shoot because we got the real thing. I used to believe that when I cast the movie, I then still had to tell this person how to act. If you've cast really well, and you've cast a good actor who's either very experienced or no experience whatsoever, but you've got to be good at spotting who can do it and who has got good intuition and who will be more than just that first read, and that first read may be terrific and then you get nothing beyond that. So you're always looking for somebody who's inventive and creative. What I now realize is that these people go home and do their own homework. So when they come back in, they bring ideas to the table. There tends to be this shut-off between the director and the actor, where the director says, nope, this is what I want you to do, yada, yada, yada. I think if you cast properly and you've got a good creative actor, they can help you a lot as well as you helping them. We'd built this course that you're about to see, and let's say cranked up the volume on what we thought an obstacle course ought to be. This course, whilst it's cranked up a bit, is not unusual in terms of using high explosives and blanks. They're not live rounds, but I think in a short time ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, they were using live rounds which they would shoot over their heads, which I think they thought was taking to the extreme. But this is pretty hairy. You don't want to get hit by a blank or a piece of blank. And the high explosives are really familiarizing them with the process of what it feels like. Remember, it'll always be worse in the real thing, the real situation. Barbed wire is fairly conventional crawling process, which is in the Marines as well as the SEAL training process. And in fact, two officers came down and saw the course and said, God damn it, we like this course. Well, can we move it to the main base at Paris Island? I was leaning heavily on the special effects supervisor here, Steve Ghosh, because, you want effects to always be big, particularly in this instance, but you also want them to be safe. Sometimes in this instance, we were suddenly changing our minds, saying, I like this instead of that. So I found Steve was very quick on his feet and also very safe. There was no one hurt or nearly hurt, I found him very prudent and clever. This was very difficult for all the actors because they're really doing it, particularly Demi, who really stuck to the process and stuck to her guns right through the whole procedure, in fact, right through the whole process of the movie, bearing in mind that the film is resting on Demi's shoulders to a certain extent as well as mine, but in a sense, as the actor or actress, she is actually supporting the film. So she was fully dedicated to what was certainly a unique film for her to do, or any woman to do for that matter. But she really did all this stuff. Rarely was she doubled. Almost, I think, 7 weeks beforehand, she was already dieting and working out in a very specific way under the guidance of Greg Jujon, and put on actually almost over 20 pounds of muscle, much to her horror. She used to insist that she looked like Tyson from the back view. But she put on almost 20 pounds for this film, which was all sinew and muscle, really. That's how she was able to do one-arm push-ups. They were real. They were unassisted, and that was her. So now this is really becoming the end of their day, although they don't know that yet. There's always that last moment, that last little trick, that last thing that can happen to you if you're in the field actually, why you can never ever drop your guard. And that's the whole idea of that little tripwire at the end, which means she dropped her guard and wasn't watching what she was doing. This was the first time I'd worked with an editor, Pietro Scalia, who I found to be, particularly good.
15, Blake, 1322, Presley, 1347. Pretty boy.
I'll certainly work with him again. In fact, I'm planning the next film with him. Pietro has got this very special eye, which all of us haven't got. He's unusual in that he's not just looking for performance with his actors and story, but he's also got a view visually. I mean, you'd be surprised, but some editors haven't got that. Pietro has this, good sense, good taste, good view, good eye. So with that good eye, Pietro could have been a good cameraman, or maybe he's going to be a director. I don't know.
10, hut! Muster back here at 0800 in your greens. Halt!
This is a nice scene after all the chaos, because to a degree it's a lull, it's quiet, particularly that cut from the noise of the course. Then you come to this square in the morning at dawn.
If your stay with this command might be.
These guys are now going to get an hour and 15 minutes sleep, but not O'Neill.
Mate.
This guy will be punished by having no sleep, and he will be taken off to dig a trench with that paddle in which he has to bury his raft. And he's got to do that in an hour and 15 minutes before he'll be called up, so he won't even have time to shower and clean his filthy clothes off him for the next day.
Your belt banging balls are rolling. You can be home curled up in your butt.
And here we have people giving up. And this actually happens. The fallout rates increases. They're looking for really putting these guys under pressure in those first 3 or 4 days. Because if you get through those first 3 or 4 days, you're going to tend to start hanging in there. Music is always a difficult choice. It's a very important choice. It's part of the storytelling process. Music to me is really like the last dialogue to go in the film. I always regard music as dialogue, and because the music is telling you and giving you information, and it's pressing, or it should be if it's doing its work successfully, it's pressing emotional buttons. It's adjusting you. And I know the actor, of course, is the focus of that, and the words are the thing that, the element that, or the two elements that are really meant to do that. But the power of sound and the music is one of those things that come later and are terribly important. And so I always think of the music as being the final dialogue. So I chose Trevor Jones, who has done quite a cross-section of, quite a repertoire, actually, quite a mix of films, both from small, low-budget movies where he did a film like Brastoff last year to this film. Yet he's a guy who still prefers to live in the UK, so it helped me there because I decided to post-produce this film. That means edit the film and mix the film in the UK. And so Trevor was there, but that's not the reason why I chose him. I'd wanted to work with him for a while. Difficulty with this thing was actually trying to find a theme without being overtly military. And I think he was very successful with the soundtrack.
I want names.
The music tracks were done and recorded at Abbey Road in London, which is that old Beatles hangout, which is still regarded as having 3 of the best rooms in Europe, actually.
It's the double standard.
There's a lot of music in this. There's 98 minutes, and Trevor Jones actually put it down about 4.5 days, which is tough. I mean, I don't mean he thought about it in 4.5 days. I mean, he worked it out over a period of weeks and months. Weeks, really. But when he put it down, it had to all go down about 4.5 days, so it was pretty tough for him, but he did an extremely, very, very sensitive job.
Give me a pink petticoat to wear around the base.
Did you just have a brain fart?
Begging your pardon, sir?
This room, in fact, had been a CO, commanding officer's room, before Blanding was closed down. This is on Camp Blanding. But the room, of course, when we take it over, was empty. So we had to furnish it the way we saw a CO's room might be. And this is pretty accurate. They're quite comfortable, very obviously very masculine. And I think they did a good job here.
What I resent is the sensitivity.
One of the most tricky problems is about to occur in the scene that follows this,
Just so someone can keep track.
which is really the turning point for the Lieutenant O'Neill character, who decides she's going to stay whatever happens, and she's going to join the club, which I think offended a lot of press about this film. The press reacted rather badly, particularly in London, to the idea that so a woman has to become a man to succeed. And my argument was, in this particular world, which is a male-dominated world, where it doesn't really make sense allowing a few real minority of females to get into the process of training, which costs a lot of money to put them through the training process, the fallout rate would be enormous, probably 99.5%. And therefore I said, in this instance, for that one woman to get through, yeah, she's got to earn her balls. So I was then regarded as total enemy of the female population. I always thought that the voice of Demi, if she were able to sing, would be Chrissie Hynde. And so I basically asked Chrissie Hynde if she would care to do a couple of things for me in the movie. And this is one of the songs that she did, which I really love, this song. And I think this is a song that was going to go onto her new album. And it just seems very appropriate, more her voice than the actual words. Now, you can't fake this stuff. You can't really do this with a wig. And you can't really have someone else cutting your hair, so Demi had to do the whole thing. And actually got through it pretty efficiently. The cutting of Demi's hair was tricky because I wanted it to look like it was real, which it was, and effortless, but I didn't want any false moves. So I basically just planted 3 cameras, one above, behind, one on each side, and took her through it so far till it started to get difficult for her to reach. Or I was simply running out of things to shoot because the scalp was clean. And then I cut once in the middle, we moved cameras, adjusted the lighting, and then finished off. So we basically did it in 2 setups with 3 cameras. Her hair, which is very important to a woman, I think psychologically, metaphorically, is her crowning glory. For that hair to go was a big deal. You could even feel women in the audience, when they realize what she's about to do, they really take that on board. It's a kind of very tenuous thing. This guy coming in through the door, is interesting to note, is my production designer. That's Arthur Max. So now in the story, we have O'Neill deciding that she will no longer be isolated. She will join the club. She will even live with the men. And in the film, I wanted this to avoid any areas of sexuality or all the obvious areas of harassment, which we're all tired of hearing about, and all kind of rather obvious notions to take dramatically. I wanted the film to be, absolutely devoid of that reference. Instead, it was purely on her capability and also the desire of the trainees around her to succeed in their process of their target of what they wanted for themselves, where, the idea of the usual male-female confrontation on a sexual basis are kind of academic at this point. These guys just want to get through the goddamn course. And I think that's also would apply in real life.
Girlfriend bring all her stuff in here like she thinks she gonna... Hey, shit, this is straight up there. Stand at attention!
It's not gonna happen.
Stand at attention!
Now, he had never been consulted about what had happened, Vigo, because remember, it's only been an hour and 15 minutes since the parade ground where he said, you got an hour and 15 minutes. So I figured she's just about got enough time to go off and see the CO, get a haircut. It's pretty tight. And get a haircut that she does herself. In fact, she didn't get any sleep lying on that bed before they come and wake him up. And they do that traditionally. They come in and they will fire blanks into the roof or let off a stun grenade. And that really gets you on your feet. So if you've only had an hour and 15 minutes sleep after 27 hours, then that'll get the blood flowing.
In my life, you've got two choices. Move out or ring out. That's it. End of file.
I think you got 1 minute to put your fucking clothes.
What about the tampons?
Hey, don't you care about tampons?
Get over yourself, Slavnik, all right?
Put your clothes on, let's go!
So there we are looking at the base in Florida. That's the actual base, with my lot running on a sand spit in front of it. So once again, I was able to use the base as a backlot, as a backdrop, I should say. Here we are back in Washington at a kind of Washington venue, bash, cocktail party. And there we're seeing the celebration of the Secretary of the Navy, who has now passed through and been given the job. So the deal was done with he and DeHaven. Problem is that the Lieutenant O'Neill, the Demi Moore character, is still succeeding. There are no signs of her failing.
Royce, we need a fourth.
Yes, sir.
You're it.
Thank you, sir.
This was a rather nice, one of the first kind of manor houses in Washington, historically. But we put in the snooker table. I just like the idea of military officers escaping the venue and sneaking off for a cigar, a drink, and a game of pool or a game of snooker. And it's kind of fitted to be able to have this conversation in the corner of what otherwise was a cocktail party.
Didn't know you smoke, sir. I don't.
David Chewy, who was my writer, I came into this process after Danielle Alexander. So I never actually did any work with Danielle Alexander. I came into it with Chewy. And, you know, one of the most difficult things in the process of filmmaking is getting the script right, the blueprint. Story, story, story. Was it Hitchcock who said story, story, and story? Or script, script, and script? He's absolutely right, because once you get that script right, everything else is relatively simple, if that's the right word. I hesitate to use the word simple, but it's doable. It's doable, it's organizable, it's budgetable, and really then it's up to the talent of the production staff behind the director as to how good it is. But that blueprint, that script is everything.
No, sir,
And I think Chewy did a great job of grafting the notion of real politics, real issues, which exist, into a good story with both, you know, humorous and intelligent dialogue. So I really enjoyed doing my thing on top of his script. Originally, I'd been an art director. I was trained as an art director, production designer, whatever you like to call it, at Royal College. And I was really 7 years at art school. So, I mean, the fact that I can draw is no great surprise. Sometimes you might think that's a nightmare to work with it from a production designer's point of view, but not really, because if anything, I think it increases the sense of expectation, you know, from me to a production designer. So it puts him a little bit under pressure, but it's good, I think. And any production designers I work with seem to really enjoy it, the process. Because I can draw, I can communicate, like, you know, again, a picture is worth 1,000 words, which is true, certainly in the process of filming. And so I can really draw, sketch, scribble, whatever you want, and say, kind of like this. And, you know, that just cuts straight to the chase. But then I got to leave them to it. And they really then got to get on with it and do their own thing. But those little sketches are invaluable. I also find them invaluable, you know, when I'm planning or thinking. To me, a blank sheet of paper when I'm stuck with a scene is the same as a writer getting writer's cramp, who will just sit there and stare at the paper. And sometimes the best thing to do is just start typing. And what I do is just start drawing, and I'll noodle and doodle with the first frame. By the time I'm halfway through that first frame, I'm already into the scene, and I can literally storyboard the whole scene, which becomes quite accurate, funnily enough. So that's then distributed, Xerox distributed, and handed to the key personnel. That would be the first AD and the cameraman and the, you know, props department and special effects department. Anybody who's really relevant department head will stare at this and go, I see, you know, You get an indication of what the day is going to be like, but also the expectation of the scope of the shot, because I'm pretty accurate with that. That's a cost-saving process as well, because then people anticipate what they have to do, and therefore they can really coordinate what they have to do. And instead of over-allowing, which I think is one of our problems in the business today, is that people tend to over-allow in the process, and therefore that's how those budgets just shoot up. There's a huge amount of waste.
Problem with my organizational skills.
Fine by me.
The part of the story where Demi has to do extracurricular activity was the fact she set up a gym in her room, which was in fact being also used as a storage hut. So she went through privately on the side extra work to catch up with the guys, and that was coordinated with a training instructor, Greg Jujon, who helped her build up to this process. But Greg is also very knowledgeable about everything from, dieting, the way you live, what you eat, combined with exercise. So that's how he was able to get her up to this very, very healthy-looking state. Demi used to say, "God damn it, I'm too heavy," but I thought she looked great. But women are always like that. They always think that they're overweight. But I think she looks terrific. Now, this officer here, which is Blondell, really, Lieutenant Blondell, who's a medical officer, is a second again for me. This is Lucinda Jenny, who played a waitress and had a nice cameo in Thelma and Louise. She was the waitress on the night the two girls go to the bar where the shooting occurs. She has a couple of scenes afterwards with Harvey Keitel. And I just went back to her because I always remember her as being really good. Again, one of those inventive, creative actors who bring a lot to a small role. Now, this was delicate because the question of lesbianism. And Blondell, Lucinda, was playing a lesbian, which will occur later. That's clearly something that the DOD would never agree with. We were going into the idea here of that there's a huge interest from the media, which is now starting to gather around the gate of the camp. It's like the tip of the iceberg that gradually will float back to Washington. Rather than just having the usual shots of the press, I thought it might be as well to just have press cameras there shooting him anyway. So that would give Pietro stuff just to clip in, to give it a different kind of energy at that point. It's not a new technique anymore, it's an old technique. Pietro's particularly good at that process.
Lieutenant, why are you doing this?
Do you ask the men the same question?
As a matter of fact, yes, I do ask them.
And what do they say?
Because I get to blow shit up.
Well, there you go.
This is her gymnasium again that she's made up herself because she wants to keep everything in private. This sequence is essentially an earning process. The use of just seeing her reassemble a gun in a way would tell us everything about her knowledge about guns instead of just actually having her blasting away at some kind of target. I thought the idea of reassembling a gun would tell you that much more. We're now in Washington, but we're in a facility. We're not in the Pentagon, of course. We're in some offices which were empty. We just found these offices and actually dressed them.
Ruling anywhere. Joining us now on Washington Tonight for the feminist perspective.
And this is real. There's no tricks here. This is Demi doing her thing. And, if you like, she can do it with the other arm as well. And that's pretty tough. We're right opposite the base again here. In fact, we're about 200 feet off the shoreline, which must have really irritated them. But what we're doing here is real. This is what they do. This is catch and recovery. The driver of the boat has got to keep his speed to just the right pace, otherwise you'd yank their arms out their sockets. But they're still dragging him into that boat fairly swiftly. They may be doing about, 15 knots, which is quite fast. It's a rubber loop which will stretch a little bit, otherwise it would. It'd just yank your arms out.
Come on, O'Neill! Cut her loose! Let her go!
Oddly enough, in all the time we were at sea, because even when I was doing White Squall, I was always worried about something unexpected happening. And of course, around here there are sharks. I'm always worried about isolating actors in the water. I think I'm a little paranoid about the sea. I don't really like swimming. And we never saw anything. Oh, we saw one thing. We had a manatee floating near them. But otherwise, we never saw anything. Shooting just this kind of thing on water is an absolute pig because, again, everything's moving, you know, and because nothing is the same on any take, then the focus is adjusting and changing. To shoot this on a platform becomes ridiculous because that's suddenly where costs run away and it gets ridiculously high just to get this dialogue stuff, which you think would be easy but is not, because you've got no points of contact, you've got nowhere to pre-mark, and you try and drift in the same vicinity. We just had a handheld camera off the side of the boat, which I've found after all this experience is that you can overkill on preparing for something like that. And it's better just to have a good man on the tiller and somebody hand-holding the camera.
Negroes can't see at night.
The person I always use for casting, and this is now the 4th or the 5th film, is Lou DeGimo. We go back now, my goodness, quite a long way. And he's just, again, one of those guys that I trust. So it makes that part of the process, A, more enjoyable, and B, easier. Okay, and a scene about, which really is asexual. That was the whole point of the scene. The fact that Demi now showers in their shower. We actually shot a scene where she walks into the shower with the guys, takes a towel off and starts showering, which ironically made the guys embarrassed, and so most of them walk out, as opposed to what you would expect, which would be macho comments. Most of them fumbled with their towels and quietly hid themselves and walked out. But I shot that, but it kind of upstaged this scene, and therefore I thought it was better just to have her with her own little showering timetable where she can go in there. The whole point of the scene is that Chief is just going about business as usual, and he's telling her that she's now been upgraded because one of them's gone out with a broken ankle, and that she is now going to be in charge, and that's what it's about. There is no reference or no sense of anything to do with male or female, and the fact that you've got a naked female in the shower there. But it adds that tension nevertheless, of course. I think the audience always expect there to be more or think something else will happen, and so that gives itself its own artificial tension. And when nothing happens, I think it kind of makes it an interesting scene.
Bad crews. Only bad leaders.
In the more academic
location here, this is not a set, it's a location in Washington, but a boardroom of a company rather than Navy. And of course we added the bits and pieces to make it look like Navy brass boardroom.
So she's lasted 8?
The cutting process, I think the first cut in this was about 2:22, which was not dramatically over length. We finally got to the running time, give or take the titles at the end and the titles at the beginning. I think it's like 2:02. We removed about 18 minutes, 19 minutes. Those first cuts I always find are interesting because in some respect, it's intuitively where I want to be. And then you test them. You do a preview with audience or previews. You might do 2 or 3 previews, which are monitored and questionnaire and put through a computer, and you get statistics and question and answer, and you get those answers in statistics. There's a danger to it, I think. It's only a tool and a guideline. I think at the end of the day, the decision really has to be yours as to what's best for the movie. I think I've always preferred all my movies slightly longer, usually nearer to that first cut than where you end up. But the way we are today in terms of the costs of movies and recoupment, audience, there is a definite leaning towards, the requirements of an audience, and there's no point in running a film at 2:20 if it's going to bore them, as opposed to 2:02 if it's going to fly. You have to be to a certain extent, practically minded, without destroying the integrity of the movie. So it's always a balance between the two, art against commerce.
You want to see me finish?
Look, I'm just trying to warn you, all right? Get you thinking about where this might be headed in case...
Demi's one of those characters who is clearly driven, which I consider a plus. Some people think it's because I'm similar in a way. I mean, I think that's what makes us directors, really. It's a funny kind of job because, there's not much room for a passive director. So in a funny kind of way, I understood Demi very much, and therefore I got on with her extremely well. So the whole process was that much more enjoyable.
Gotta go, Russ.
Wait a second, though.
Here we are back in Florida. Of course, it's not called Captiva Island, but I like the name. I got that off the map. We're now cranking up the volume in terms of training. And, of course, they'll have done this before. They'll have jumped out of the back of helicopters. But now they've got full packs on. They've probably got 45 pounds on the back, maybe more. And the emphasis here is do not get captured. Because if you do, you're about to see what happens if you do. This is real. They do this. And if they get captured, they are treated like prisoners of war. And they are interrogated.
60 seconds on! First man up!
Now, when you jump out of a helicopter with all those guys who are loaded up, I think it's even as heavy as 60 pounds. They are leaping out from 35, 40 feet. When in fact, they should only be jumping out from 15 feet, max 20. That's high. But of course, as the helicopter gets lighter as they jump out, they very subtly float higher. So all these guys are relying on a good pilot to keep them and maintain them at a level of 15 feet. Otherwise, the last man out can have as much as 40 feet to jump from, which is very high. Normally, they are dropped at a certain point, either, probably because they're SEALs, sea, earth, air, land. They're probably dropped in the sea, so their arrival is nearly always by sea. And they will be given coordinates to find this particular place, and that will be the target, is to go in, leave their mark, and get out without being detected.
Slotnick, take it to 210. Cortez, move out. Move out. Let's go.
So they're probably trekking through undergrowth or jungle here for several kilometers, completely blind. So a lot of this process is dead reckoning to find the position. Throat mics, in reality, they literally whisper and press two buttons on their throat, and so there's very little heard. So that's when you see when they put their hands to their throat, that's what they're doing.
Cortez, you take my left flank. The rest of us, move it.
We were assured there are no alligators in the water here, and a week later they found a 14-footer. We shot this at Hunting Island in Carolina, near Beaufort, because it looks like it is tropical.
Looks like she's right in the money.
I had a busted watch once, and it was right twice a day.
But it kind of looks great because it's kind of generic. It looks like it could be Manila, it could be Thailand, Vietnam. It's a wonderfully useful area because in this area you've got many different kind of looks and locations. From plantation housing, plantation towns, to jungle and grassland and swamp. Got many, many variations and choices.
Cool, Newberry, right side. Flea, you come with me. Let's move out.
Arthur Max built this stilted swamp house.
Listen up, everybody. We need film from all angles, record weapons, vehicles, count bad guys.
This is an inlet. It's seawater, actually, which is unusual because to have alligators in there. Because I think alligators are normally freshwater. There it is. So Arthur had a very short amount of time to get that up, pile on it, build a hut, which would have to take a scene inside it and clear the area and clear the jungle around it.
Cortez. What the hell are you doing?
Now, these guys are very competitive, and I guess people who volunteer for this kind of process are unusual and to a certain extent loose cannons anyway. So I think this kind of larking about does occur, but of course would never occur in the real thing. But they are very competitive and do and will tend to headbutt. But part of the process is finding that spirit and then harnessing it. Because these guys will go further than normal people.
Rally point. Move your hand, man.
Now, we're running out of time here, so I had to find a quick way of getting them captured. So I thought plastic bags are pretty useful. And that'll get you from here into the camp in a flash. We'd allowed for another day of running around the jungle, getting caught, etc. But actually, I think this works fine. Because you kind of want to get into the next real episode, which is her confrontation with Vigo.
Flea, are you all right?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Now, there's a perversity also to this, which is kind of accurate. Are you hurt or are you injured? If you're injured, there's nothing. That's bad luck, and you're out the course. And if you want to reapply, you can come back and start the whole thing all over again, which very few of them do that. If you're hurt, then one can assume that you just carry on, because that's temporary. And you got to carry on with the hurt, whatever it is. And some of these guys have been known to hide a broken arm or a broken rib and not admit that they're actually injured, just to stay with the course, which is kind of sad to a guy who gets pretty well all the way through the course and then breaks an ankle or breaks a rib, and therefore he's out. And to get back, he's got to repair himself, reapply, and go through the whole thing again. I guess that's part of the quality of, what they're looking for. Somebody who's prepared to do that. Now you have cross-examination. They've never set their eyes on these people before, although they speak American. And they're probably experienced SEALs. This is part of their job, is to come in and put these trainees through hell. The supervisor who's monitoring this and seeing that things don't go beyond where they should is Vigo.
We're gonna be all right, Wick? We're gonna make it, right?
I don't know. Last time I didn't.
What happened?
I had a problem with small spaces.
Now, this is also accurate, that we've learned that this guy did it before and failed and has come back to try again. And I met several SEALs who'd had 2 goes at it, even 3, who eventually were determined to get in. Same mentality as a mountain climber, really, who's determined to get to the top.
Got a problem!
So you hurt, Flea, or just injured?
If you're injured, we'll get you off the island, we'll get you medical attention. How'd that be?
Of course, you ain't never gonna see your crew again.
So that's what that dialogue's about, is basically telling you if you're really injured, then you're out. So now they realize that he's actually injured. they wanted to admit it.
That's a brave response. Let's try it again, Flea. Are you hurt or are you injured?
Give it up, man!
What's it gonna be, Ensign?
Please, please don't fucking do that anymore.
I had a lot of flack about these scenes because the outside world, usually in the form of press, actually, who seem to make it their job to, instead of relying on us to make films, their quest in life seems to be to destroy the process of making movies. But they were questioning the extremities here. And in fact, I based this on information and research that I went through talking to people when I was planning it, who'd done it, or who had been trainees, or had been in the process, or who had, in fact, had been commanders. And historically, over the years, they're designing these programs for these people, and from time to time, there have been accidents. And so the program, as to what they go through, is constantly under review and being adjusted because the accidents have proved fatal before, or people who are given the power of, let's say, this character here, which is Viggo Mortensen, if they're not in control of their own, of themselves, can get dangerous. But there's no other way of training these people other than taking them right to the line, to the limit.
Are you wounded, Lieutenant? Was he too heavy? Or were you just plain chicken shit?
You're not getting anything out of me.
This was a tricky group of scenes because, like anything physical, anybody can get hurt. You got to be very careful how it's done. So even a shot like that is very carefully done, where somebody is really padded. That post is really padded, so nobody gets hurt.
Jack.
You rehearse this very carefully, because anything physical, I don't want anybody, even a small bone broken or a finger broken, and the film's over. So apart from not wanting to hurt the actor or the actress, I also don't want the film to be suspended or go down because of some stupid piece of planning, right? So I'm very, very careful about this and protecting everybody, and of course protecting the film.
You didn't tell me shit.
You think we should go easy on women, Lieutenant?
Even where Viggo takes a hold of her and runs her out the door, it looks like her head makes the door open, but of course it doesn't. But it does look intense. Now, this is clean water, of course, but it looks filthy. You have vegetable matter in there, fresh vegetable matter in there, but it looks pretty disgusting. But she was going to give Viggo a cue by squeezing his leg when she'd run out of breath. And I think Viggo was getting pretty, with the scene here, so I think eventually she was squeezing his leg like crazy to say, "I am drowning." Now, here she's slammed against, that's plastic wire.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But everybody, of course, responds to the fact that they think it looks like real wire. Now he's going to do something which is key. Would happen every time, wherever she was captured. If it was a female, the tendency would be to put the female in front of the men, and they would work on the female, not on the men. And that here we have one of the biggest problems that Viggo's worried about is the vulnerability of his men by using her. He's no longer worried about her. He knows who she is and how tough she is and what she's made of. He's now focusing on the men. He knows that having a female as part of a team could be his weakest link. This whole thing from our time, from the helicopter dropping in the sea to the end of the scene, was all one location, really. I can't remember now. I think we had allowed about 5 days for the whole thing. So we didn't have a lot of time to do these scenes here, which really take more trouble and more time than dropping people out of the back of a helicopter. I didn't want this to be like, you know, a karate thing. I wanted this really to be like a real punch-up. Again, it's carefully blocked and rehearsed. Like, for instance, here, when he's about to hit her, of course, he doesn't touch her. And her head actually didn't even touch that post. But sound does everything.
You're a real fucking hero, man.
Here's the whole point of these scenes. You suddenly realize what he's doing.
Guys, I'm saving her life. And yours. Her presence makes us all vulnerable. I don't want you learning that inconvenient fact under fire.
They reacted very positively at the line that's about to follow from Demi.
Elsewhere.
Suck my dick.
You know, particularly the women kind of cheered. So that's the line really where she's kind of earned her rights and definitely, you know, has joined the club, which really is a requirement of this part of the services. Whether the journalists like that or not, that's what it's about. I was worried about this scene coming out so strongly that this scene really provoked a rewrite and a reappraisal of the whole last act of the movie.
It ain't gonna happen again.
So Viggo's words here summarize what our concerns were. Because we added this scene, we wrote this scene.
Yeah, well, maybe not with you, but with these guys, but with me. She's not the problem. We are.
She just made it through Syria.
Shooting inside cars is always an absolute pig because I hate driving around with a car which is on a trailer because I always feel I'm up too high in the air. You got lights bristling all over it, and it's just such an artificial situation. So all we did in this is I put a camera on my knee, and we shot it without any rigs. We kept circling around the block because the sun was very low and was blasting into the car. So this is lit without any light at all, really, other than sunlight. It just means you got to get it done pretty quick, otherwise the sun keeps falling.
I think they wait for your call.
Washington is a beautiful city, but it's also very difficult to shoot it because you've got so many departments to deal with. For obvious reasons, you've got a very strong bureaucracy and several departments to go through. Even though the Film Commission, Washington, are tremendously helpful, it's still tough.
I would have paid money to have been there.
Oh, you heard, huh?
I think it was on the evening news.
It's just what I need, more PR.
Listen, a few of us are going to go over to the beach, and it's just a barbecue.
And I think this device, this MacGuffin, this story point is a delicate one anyway. You know, about the fact that there's a question of lesbian, but it's something that could and would and has been used with the military, which is like, tends to take the attitude, hear no evil, see no evil. As long as you don't bring it up in front of them, it all flies. If they're confronted with it, they have to react. And therefore we thought it was a fair enough and accurate enough and current enough with current affairs device to use to put her in a position where they might drum her out the training course. They do not want her to win. They do not want her to get through the process, because you'll find out later why.
I like you better when you drink.
You know, Cortez, I like you better when I drink.
Shots are up, fellas! We are shots! We got shots!
Yeah. Need a couple more. Yeah. Here we go.
All right, people.
Again, this is a location, a bar, an actual bar in Florida, which actually is a bar that was near one of the camps. So I'm sure it's been used for this precise purpose many times. Celebration of the fact that they're pretty well through.
Keep it down, all right?
Jordan, I was wondering if you, you're all right.
I gotta get out of here.
This scene's kind of amusing because I almost felt it's almost out of Thelma and Louise, really.
Ain't really none of my business, but I say leave the bastard.
I liked it. There's a light point in the movie, and God knows we needed a light touch here and there. Again, the resistance to any notion, because I'm sure, you know, with Hollywood movies and the expectation that, oh, she will fall in love with the SEAL commander, or he, her, etc., is the tendency, the expectation. I just didn't want any of that. It's all about, as near as I can, the real thing and real attitudes. And the last thing in Master Chief's mind anyway would be anything like that, or hers. So I think we successfully avoided those cliches. The secret photographer is one of my casting guys, Billy Gerber, who works with Lou DiGiamo, and Lou casts the specific people, and Billy gets into the big crowds, the casting. Let's say if there are 8 SEALs who are cast specifically, Billy will come up with the rest. And I said, listen, I need a photographer, so Billy was it. This was always a difficult one. How do I infer something without being that on the nose? And eventually we came up with the idea that a fingerprint of a fax machine might be useful. So if you have a badly adjusted fax machine, then it can have its own fingerprint, which can either be grain on the paper left by a dirty roller. And so we came up with that idea of something that gives away whose office it came from.
On a real world op, we always use backups. 2 is 1, 1 is none. Is that understood?
Widescreen is something I nearly always favor. In fact, I've only shot one film, 185, which was The Duelists, which was my first film. But as soon as I got onto widescreen, I just liked the format. I liked the proportion of the frame. Some people have a problem with filling it. I don't really. I like to place things in this visual dynamics on a widescreen. Like here's a good example of, you can get her way on the right and him way on the left, and just a nice dynamic. It's a nice, seems to be more of a natural view of things, funnily enough, than 185.
Sex variety. Specifically,
the difficulties of anamorphic, which this is, widescreen is anamorphic, which means there's more glass on the front, means you tend to lose about 2 stops. So it becomes more expensive to use anamorphic because you need more lights, and more lights mean more time and more personnel. And so anamorphic is a more expensive process than 185. 185 is spherical lenses that are faster, and therefore you need less light. But they have a clarity on them in spherical, which is fine, but it's a very subtle difference. Anamorphic because you've got more glass on it, and therefore you've got a shorter depth of field, a depth of focus, which I like. I think that contributes to the visual aspects of the film. Spherical, your depth of focus is much greater, and it's a matter of preference as to whether you prefer that or not.
Obviously, someone is trying to sabotage my training.
You may repeat your training at a future date, if clear.
I can't go through this shit again.
Ratchet down, Lieutenant.
I would not choose to repeat the training, sir, nor do I care to drive a desk pending the outcome of this malicious allegation. No, I respectfully request you keep me with my crew, or you send me packing.
That sounded dangerously like an ultimatum.
You take it as you will, sir.
So here she is, she's out. And I had a big resistance from Demi here saying, I would not ring the bell. And I said, but I need you to ring the bell. Dramatically, we need it. So how about the compromise be you break the bat on the bell? So she bought that and rang the bell. And then we have the Chrissie Hynde song coming in here, which I thought was terrific. Once we'd done the soundtrack, that occurred first with Trevor Jones, the producer of Chrissie Hynde's songs, which are being done for us, was Trevor Horn. And Trevor Horn was therefore able to listen to the soundtrack that was going to precede and come in just before the song. So he could key off that. So, you bring those two elements together, and sometimes they ignore it, or sometimes they actually use it. In the bell ringing scene, there's a particularly good grafting of soundtrack into the song. So here we are back at her house that she probably hasn't been in for 4.5 months. And Royce is there. But it's interesting that this house, this cottage, is not in the place we first shot the house. One house where we began was in another state, and it didn't suit our schedule, so we chose another cottage here to show the side of the house. So there's the magic of filmmaking. You don't have to be, locked to the absolute continuity logistics. You've really got to know how you can duck and dive and move around. So there's two separate houses here.
It was only so I could have you close.
I didn't want the scenes to be schmaltzy or lovey-dovey or love scenes or sex scenes because it had no part in the movie. But more are coming together and showing her vulnerability and femininity. And that's all. That's all we need to see. The fact that they are a couple and the fact that they are in love. And that's it. That's all I need to see. This always gets a little bit of a giggle because I've got a bottle on the table. It looks like product placement, but it's not. A bottle of Jim Beam and Demi smoking cigars is why they're amused by it. But I know women who like whiskey and also smoke cigars. In fact, Demi used to smoke half my cigars. She'd come over and say, give us a cigar.
This is faxed to the JAG office Tuesday. Arrived on my desk Wednesday morning.
So here we have the identification of the fingerprint. I live with faxes, so I remembered sometimes the fax machine is badly adjusted. It leaves a grain, and it can come from somebody's machine, so you can actually identify it that way.
Take a look on the right.
Shit.
That's right. I mean, how important is this to you, Jordan? I'm just asking. I'm just asking.
Helicopter shots are part of the toolkit now. I think they used to be special before, but now everybody does it. And it's not something I like to go up and I've been up so often, I think I'm pushing my luck. So I always use the same guys to do that.
Wait, look at this.
This is interesting. We weren't allowed to shoot in the Senate. So we're here at Richmond, inside this building, which I think was the first idea. Wasn't Richmond probably targeted to become the capital of the United States before Washington? There is like a Senate here, which is a kind of smaller version, but these rooms were beautiful and were original. And so that's where we shot them.
This commission worked for the good of the country. Of course...
So here we're about to find out the truth, that any senator doesn't want to be seen to be bringing back soldiers and body bags, certainly not females, and particularly if they're a female senator. And that's the basis of this subterfuge. She thought she'd drop out. She thought she'd not make it. And in fact, she was making it. So it was becoming an embarrassment to the DeHaven character.
Very nice photos.
I could have shot this cut to cut, covering on Demi, covering on Anne, but I chose to keep it in one. I just liked the idea of moving around them, which would actually remind us that, the room was filled, and therefore it puts DeHaven under pressure, having those people around, because she knows that Demi is now volatile, and therefore would be dangerous to her. And also at this moment in the film, the Lieutenant O'Neill character has become already a bit of a cover girl on a bit of Newsweek. She'd be in the news, she'd be all over the place. You name it, she'd be in there. It was interesting when we started off this process of the film, the tail hook affair had happened 10 months prior, and that young lady who had decided to go to the Citadel on her own, who'd lasted a week, literally occurred, I think, the week of beginning of principal photography. But since the making of the movie and going through the process of post, there have been many occurrences have surfaced. And so the film became very on the button. I like this scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's really the DeHaven character, who could be seen as the bad guy in it, but in fact, when you listen to her, it makes a lot of sense. So she's giving her point of view. And Demi, of course, is certainly giving her point of view.
The choice isn't yours, and it isn't mine. American families are just not prepared to have their daughters and young mothers in harm's way. You don't know that. Yes, I do.
And, of course, both Demi and Anne Bancroft married to two equally famous actors. And Bruce turned up on several occasions, and as did Mel. He turned up twice, and it was kind of interesting having them hang around on the set and watch. I was a little uneasy, actually, at first about that, but actually it was quite interesting, because in the process of waiting around or waiting for a setup to then get going so we could get started on it, they would talk about basically directing, and say, Bruce used to ask me, he said, why did I never get angry? And I'd say I discovered early on it's not worth it. You don't win by being a screamer. But for the most part, they're very supportive and fascinated by the process.
I wonder what Secretary Hayes would think about this. If he was to know how you dealt me away. For bases. For votes.
What makes you think he doesn't know?
Now here we have what I think is, in screenwriting, is really good, because we start using a line from earlier in the movie when they first met. I like that when those things happen. It means the writer knows what he's doing, understands structure. Here it is.
What? You like pissed off? What?
Which makes that kind of humorous, really. And she throws back in her face what she said to her earlier in the film. Now, this was tricky because, you're really making a little bit of a melodrama of this part of the scene here, with important to see that people are witnessing something that's happening without realizing what is happening, which is bending the rules of credibility. I figured it had to happen there, and that was that. So I think it works. We pulled that off. That was a moment where I was a little worried about it, but I think the two actresses pulled that off great.
Somehow, I'll get you back in.
So now they're coming back. This is where she would have resumed the course and completed her training. From this moment on is where we readjusted the whole ending to the end of the movie.
Guys,
Guys, come here, take a look at this. Look who's back in.
Now, these satellites that spin around the world, there are far more up there than we imagine. And a lot of people think they're solar driven. They're not. They're driven by plutonium. And from time to time, these satellites come down, and because we're 90% sea, they drop into the sea and therefore are never recovered. When they hit land, because you've got plutonium in the core, that plutonium is bomb capable. It's down to this kind of group to go in and recover them. They don't negotiate if it's on difficult soil. They just go in and they take it. And I think half the time we don't even know about it. What was interesting is 2 weeks after we shot this, that is exactly what happened. A satellite dropped out of the sky, hit some foreign soil, and they had to send in a group to take it out. The big question was, okay, you want to upgrade the ending, then that's going to cost money. It's above and beyond the budget. How are you going to cope with that? So that underwater shot was a piece of library. This stuff is shot in an old troop ship in Long Beach, which was from 1942. We had a few lights and clean it up, and you wouldn't know that you weren't inside the quarters on board a submarine. The sea shots, the surface shots of the submarine, I simply called up my brother Tony Scott and said, I want 3 shots from Crimson Tide. All right, and he said, fine. And so that's how we did it.
Thomas Taylor, I don't know.
Well, try to explain. It was just exercise. Well, he was talking English and I was talking Arabic.
So here we are in a 1942 troop carrier. And even in the corridors where you're with the captain and you're with Vigo, we're still in the same ship. All it is graphics, change the lights, clean it up a little bit, and we're inside a nuclear sub.
Group Tango Chaser. We are proceeding towards hostile waters. Department heads, make ready for battle conditions.
And that's how quickly it could change. So here we are, still inside a 1942, really, Army cargo ship. Change the lighting, a little bit of blue, a few chevrons, and away you go.
Already en route to the strike zone. My problem is that their exit plan has gone to total shit. Now, your CRT.
What's interesting about, and ironically about, the process of filmmaking, we could easily have spent, I don't know, $200,000 on this set and never seen it, other than this. I think this is my years as a commercial filmmaker become very practically minded because I know exactly how it'll interpret, and therefore there can be big cost savings. Now here, I shot this against a flat in Shepperton Studios, and then to cut this in Los Angeles on board that carrier. So this angle is Shepperton Studios, where I brought in 2 guys, Vigo and the captain, because I need to pick up a bit of Irving the Explainer. And the reverse was on Long Beach.
This is Las Vegas. Be advised, extract team.
Here we are on Lone Pine, having broken the film, stopped the film. I wrapped the film when we decided that we would go for this new ending, so I would then get on with my editing, and meanwhile I would be preparing and gearing up for shooting this new ending, which meant different location hunting, etc.
Are we talking the KH family?
So I basically terminated the film for 7 weeks and then picked up the reins after 7 weeks and started the film again. In that time, I had to location hunt for North Africa. And because I was cutting in the UK, I went and had a look at North Africa, Emirates, Jordan, Morocco.
Unfortunately, I do, Skipper.
Carry on.
And I kept thinking, I know somewhere actually more appropriate than this, which happens to be in California, is Lone Pine, so that's where we ended up.
Inner door dog.
Understand, inner door closed and dog.
Stock footage. And now here we are about 100 miles north of Santa Barbara, where we just stuck a fisherman's mosque on the beach, which I'd seen in Morocco. And actually these beaches, for their width, are very similar to Morocco. So this could easily be Libya, a part of the coast which was very, very empty, deserted. So from this beach landing, we then intercut this part with Lone Pine, which is about 45 minutes north of Los Angeles. So those two are off to Lone Pine. But I think this beach was very successful and somehow does not look Californian. And here we are on Lone Pine. In this valley, many Hollywood films were shot in the 20s and 30s and 40s, including classics like Gunga Din. I think even Beau Geste. I think a lot of Tom Mix films were shot in this valley. And so all we did was add a petrol dump, a couple of camels, with some Bedouins down there, some army vehicles, and I've got Libya.
Holy shit.
Border Patrol. Little ratty ass, but still.
To a certain extent, I wanted this to be a little bit more documentary in feeling, particularly when you hit the violence, because we haven't got big set pieces with huge pyrotechnics, but more covert, which is smaller. I felt, a slightly more documentary approach would make it feel more real, make the audience feel more present.
Wick, you copy? Wick. Negative. I'll keep eyes on you. Fall back, radio chaser.
No, Lieutenant.
I always work very closely with the cameraman because I can't separate myself from the camera and making the movie process. When I first started out making movies, I was told that I couldn't really direct and operate. And so for the first 5 days on the Duelists, I had an operator who then resigned at the end of the process because I think I was tending to be a little bit overzealous, because you must remember, by the time I did a movie, I'd done 15 years of television commercials where I'd been operating myself for 15 years. And I just didn't want to start driving the bus differently. And I went back to the process of operating myself. It makes all the sense in the world, because the director ought to have a vision. If he hasn't got a vision, he shouldn't be directing. Part of that vision, we are dealing with pictures. It better be something to do with the picture, as well as the words. That's why whenever I can, I still operate. But because we tend to work at minimum of 2 cameras, there's always operators there, good ones, It means just because I operate, I don't need an operator who's crazy. On the contrary, I need a really good operator who will be very inventive, because the more inventive they are, then the less I've got to get into that area. And if I find I'm in an area where I trust somebody, in this instance my operator is Craig Hagenson, who is, I think, one of the best in the business, I tend to just have the discussion, then sit back and watch it happen. I've always said operating is one of the best jobs on the floor. It's where all the excitement happens. It happens through that lens, that viewfinder that we are now staring at, because that's the view that the operator has, is what you're staring at. And therefore, that's where the bells ring for me. And that's why I hate being taken off the camera, because I love it. But by doing that means that I work very closely with the cameraman. It doesn't slow it down. If anything, it speeds up the whole process. And I think for the most part, cameramen enjoy working with me. Although initially I think there's a resistance and concern about the fact that I may do or get into and cross over into their area a lot. It's not true. I still expect a huge amount from a cameraman and rely on them tremendously. And Huey is one of those guys who particularly has extremely good taste and has a great eye, and also a very great technical proficiency. of maintaining this certain quality. Once you say, right, we're going to go down this path, let's stay with that. That's what, a good cameraman can do, but he's also constantly got his eye on the material and that it's right for the material as well. A cameraman is there really to interpret what his director wants, but a great cameraman can have an influence on a director who is, let's say, less knowledgeable in these areas and help tremendously. In which case, then he's got to very much take into account the story and the script.
The extract site, wherever that is, Scorpion's mission goes down.
Look, leave one boat with my team and I'll wait for the chief.
So, I wanted this little documentary effect to start kicking in here. So it's really called just handheld camera. A lot of it's shot in the zoom, so you have a lot of adjustment on the zoom. And I thought the adjustment looked quite good, so I thought we'd just leave it in and just use it as it would be.
Coming back this way. He's not going to lead him to us, right? Now look here. If we're here, and I left the chief here, I think he's going to make his way southwest, down this wash, and out to sea. Now, if we hump it, we can get there and knock out any pursuit.
You worked this out with the chief ahead of time, O'Neill? You're just clairvoyant.
The editing process that I've tried every which way, and the editing time is the time of the editor. I've tried sitting at the back of the room and waiting, and even with today's state-of-the-art machine, as opposed to the usual, first of all, the Hollywood Moviola, then the Steenbeck, which is an editing machine. But now today you've got Lightworks and you've got, very, very sophisticated electronic systems for the editorial process, which are much faster. It doesn't matter how fast technology moves, we still get impatient. So I tend not to sit in the editing room now. I would rather leave a great editor to it, who then, having talked to him having seen the storyboards and seen the rushes together where I select takes, I'll let him get on with it. And when he's ready, let's say on a scene or a reel, he'll say, okay, come and have a look, see where we are. Because I find the editing process is important to be able to take 2 steps back to enable you to become pragmatic. Because if you sit in the editing room, I've found you bury yourself alive, where you just start to lose the wood for the trees. And I like to separate myself from the film at that moment, let somebody else at it, and then I can come in refreshed and become completely pragmatic.
Yeah, let's do it.
These claymores are very simple to set, and you can either set them with a pressure point or you can set them with a wire and a clacker, which is what they've got. A claymore is a very simple piece of equipment, which is, basically 1,500 ball bearings, tiny ball bearings, which are set in an explosive base. The effect is devastating. Now, because all this part of the film is being shot about 7 weeks, almost 2 months after when we wrapped the main body of the film, I lost Huey, so I took on a cameraman here to do all the desert stuff and the beach stuff called Danny Mindell, who again was a guy that I know from commercials, and in fact had been a camera assistant on Thelma and Louise. So I knew what I was going to get, and he's a pretty good cameraman. The preparation for this was, in fact, took 2 months while I was editing, so I didn't waste time. So the whole editing process was going on while we were planning this bit. And I think we were in here for about total beach and here. I think we're in about 2 weeks. The whole overall shooting of the film is probably 16 weeks.
Let's get ready to rock and roll.
These funny little twitches on the zoom, I was just experimented really, and I was lying there, waiting for the next take, and it came up. I started doing it because I liked it, and I knew that combined with sound would, add something to it, and add an urgency and if you like, kind of documentary quality to it, because I knew it'd be cut up into many pieces anyway, and so we had all 3 cameras doing that eventually, so I could intercut with. It couldn't be just me doing it, and it just gives an urgency to it. I think it's quite effective.
Fire! 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 Cover him! Fire! 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 Come in!
McCall, I'm going in!
Shit! Quick, down the
I had to work out a bridge between here and the beach because I thought, oh my God, you know, we've got nothing in sight here sea-wise. So we went in for colored dye, which they do. They use colored dye, which finally they want to run through. It's like literally a smoke screen. So once they've done, they lay down a smoke screen, run the hell out of there, and get to their cover, because now they've called in air cover, which will also pick them up. This is their most dangerous time, actually, when they're on the run. You see the color dye going down.
Stay down! Stay down! Let's fall back! Fall back!
So what they've now done is deviated the attention. And so this lot, who would be rangers, who would have been sent into, Army Rangers have been sent in to recover that core, they get out pretty well unhassled. So find cover as much as possible, find low ground, make yourself the smallest possible target. And these hellos came in really low, I mean, sometimes below the lens. Again, because we couldn't get DOD, these are pretty old helicopters. This one's about 17 years old, but actually it looks state-of-the-art because it's so streamlined. But the pilots were terrific. And linking the explosives to the cannons is kind of quite successful here. Got really lucky on some of those jerky shots. One particularly looks a little bit like straight out of the Gulf. Here, that one, that's good. That's good timing there. Got completely lucky there. Now, what was interesting, we shot 2 endings. The ending you see here, after all the effort and difficulties of her going through the process of training, it just seemed to be too much for an audience to bear. But what I did do is I actually did an alternative ending, which is exactly the same, until she ran up the ramp, and then she caught a stray bullet, and she went down, and she died on the floor of the helicopter next to the chief, who's watching her fade away. So that was the only thing that would have been different. Then we'd have gone to this.
Hey, O'Neill! I'd go to war with you any day!
I'll never live this one down.
We tested both endings, and funnily enough, we tested pretty high. We came out, I think, like 82, and the ending with her death came out at 78, so it was pretty close. It was such a shock on such a downer that I think we just couldn't go with that.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Mr. Chief.
Welcome aboard, sir.
Thank you, Master Chief.
Welcome aboard, sir.
Thank you, Master Chief.
Again, throughout the whole film, no real personal contact with Demi and the chief, which I liked. Until now, really. This is where they earn their trident, or whatever it is, the badge. In some instances, the process of getting it is so macho that they pin it on and then they punch the badge so the spikes blood you. So you have a little bit of blood, but I don't know, I thought that was just too much to swallow. I thought this was a pretty good ending, was he shows his real respect for her by showing her where the poem came from. And she bailed him out, and so he actually gives her his Navy Cross.
I remember holding on to you.
So what's interesting about a lot of these fellows who do this job is their devotion to the process of what they do, and on the surface, this overall modesty. So I thought this is what was nice about the ending, is there's no words, because the Master Chief is really not up to that display of emotion. Instead, prefers to leave it and do it the way he did it, which is his way of saying thanks. The directing process has evolved with me, because I started off as a designer where I was very sophisticated in the process of designing, but I suddenly had some live BBC shows thrown at me where I was asked to direct, which is kind of, in a way, when you think about it, pretty irresponsible because they were live TV in those days. And I just took the opportunity and went for the show and had no idea what I was doing. But I had a good sense, good intuition about what to do. And one of the most agonizing parts of it was learning about rehearsal with actors in formal rehearsal rooms, where you don't get that kind of luxury in movies, even big movies. In television, it was interesting because the sets would be marked out on the floor with tape, and, they have the basic pieces of furniture, a table, a chair, a cup, a door, through which you could rehearse each scene and rehearse the play or rehearse the show. And I learned there, really. That became my drama school, in learning the formality of sitting around a table with a whole bunch of actors and talking to them and bringing everything together. It's a bit like being a cowboy, with a herd. No actors won't like to hear about themselves talk that way, and I don't mean it that way. But it's like you're really trying to bring a whole group of people and elements together at once. So you're constantly outriding as well as being inside and detailing. I keep calling it a sculptural process. It's a little bit here and it's a little bit there, and I think sometimes you do more than people realize. Well, I hope you enjoyed the process of listening to what I've got to say about the making of this movie.